Branch, Acropolis Institute of Technology and Research. I am Vinayak Dubey, Secretary of IEEE Student Branch at Acropolis Institute of Technology and Research, and your host for today's podcast. Last year, our podcast series featured inspiring conversations with renowned Indian professionals. Building upon that success, we are excited to take global step this year. Additionally, we would like to highlight our achievement as we have received the award for the Best Student Branch from the India Council, and our branch counselor, Dr. Gaurav Chaitanya sir, received the award for the Best Branch Counselor 2025. Today, we are honored to welcome Manfred Schindler sir, an IEEE Fellow and a respected leader in global engineering community, recognized for his dedication to advanced technology, fostering innovation, and strengthening collaboration across the engineering industry. With decades of experience in RF and wireless technology, Fred currently works as an independent consultant in RF engineering management, a role he has held since 2006. His work focuses on technology evaluation, product development strategy, project management, and guiding organizations through complex innovation decisions. Fred has been actively involved with IEEE for over 2 decades, contributing in several key leadership roles. He currently serves as Vice President Technical Activities and previously held positions including Vice President elect for Technical Activities, Director of the IEEE Board of Directors Division 4, voting members of the Technical Activities Board TAB, and chairs of the Conference Publication Committee. His long-standing service reflects a deep commitment to the growth of the global engineering community. Earlier in his career, Fred had leadership positions such as Design Center Director at Corvo Inc., where he led advanced wireless semiconductor development and founder of the Boston Design Center at RFMD. He has also contributed in technical and managerial roles at IBM Microelectronics, ATM Microwave, and Raytheon. His expertise across RF engineering, wireless systems, semiconductor technology, and engineering leadership makes him a valued voice in the evolution of modern communication technologies. So we would like to welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to you, your student branch, and your counselor.
Thank you so much, sir. The topic for today is innovation and entrepreneurship. As innovation continues to reshape industries and technology drives new possibilities, entrepreneurship plays a vital role in turning ideas into real world impact. Now, let's dive into the conversation. We have some exciting questions lined up to explore this dynamic world of innovation and entrepreneurship. So, the first question for you, sir, is what does innovation truly mean to you beyond technology?
You know, innovation to me is developing something that addresses a need. I don't think it's a matter of coming up with a brilliant idea and then finding out who might be able to take advantage of it. It's really the other way around. It's a matter of finding out what a group of individuals or a company or an organization needs, and developing a solution for that problem. And you know, the greatest innovations, I believe, come from when you understand better than the customer or client what they need than they do. So it's really to be successful, really have to delve into what's going on, and then satisfying what they need. You know, a great example, kind of in the RF space, was you know, Nokia was the dominant mobile phone company for a long time, and they lost that. But that's not really relevant to the story I want to tell. Previous to Nokia, Ericsson was the dominant player in the market, and they were both making GSM phones at the time. And you know, Ericsson's phones were beautifully engineered. You know, we supplied parts to them. And what they focused on was maximizing talk time. You know, mobile phones at the time were relatively new, consumed quite a bit of power. Batteries weren't quite as sophisticated as they are today. And Ericsson focused on talk time, figuring that's what people really wanted. Nokia understood better what the larger market wanted, and that was standby time. Most of your time, the phone is not operating; it's just sitting waiting. Um, and so they optimized their electronics to not consume much power when you weren't talking. And so you could get standby times of up to a week. You charge your phone. You could go on a trip and comfortably not have to worry about charging it all day. And quickly they took over the market. And I don't think people really appreciated that that's what they wanted at the time. But once it was available, they came to recognize that that was something quite attractive. Of course, later on, they lost everything with the smartphone era.
So basically, it's about solving a problem which might exist or not. Yeah, maybe exist in the near future. That's
a problem that may not be recognized.
Maybe not recognized, but it is essential to be recognized.
Yes, right.
That's a great answer. How can students start thinking like entrepreneurs and while it's still in college?
Well, so you will all be doing projects at some point as a student, and I'm willing to guess that you have quite a bit of latitude in developing that project. And so think about a community. Our technology can solve all kinds of problems. And by our technology, electronics, computers, sensors, you name it. It's pretty broad. So think about a community and a problem they have, and how you might be able to solve it. This was not a school project, but when I was younger, I had a grandmother who had some surgery and lost her vocal cords, so she was only able to whisper, not to speak loudly, and that, of course, was a bit of a challenge for her. So I made her a little portable, amplifier with a loudspeaker and a microphone that she could put in her purse. And she didn't think she needed that, but it seemed like an interesting project for me. It wasn't very, very complicated. And so, I thought that was a nice solution to a problem. So, think about a community or a person or, a need, and then try to really understand what the problem is and how your technology might be able to solve it. I think that's a great start. And so once you've done that exercise in your project, I think you're primed to become an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurship, once again, you want to develop a product, but it's always best to not start with an idea. Even if you have an idea, go talk to people who you think might want your idea and use that to understand what problems they have. And then maybe you modify your idea, or maybe you come up with an entirely different idea. But I think that's the key to entrepreneurship.
So to start, we can say that we should start rather than having an idea. We should just go for a start.
Right. Even if you have an idea, use that as a way to talk about what people need.
So the third question is, what are the common mistakes first-time entrepreneurs make?
The biggest one is to have a brilliant idea. And to think that, well, everybody's going to want this. Or even worse, perhaps, is to say, this is a great idea. We could enter this market, and all I need to do is capture 5% of the market, and I'll be rich. Well, if there's something already in the market, you need a really good reason for people to switch from something that they're comfortable with, from a supplier that has a known reputation. So you can't just go into things saying, "Here's my brilliant idea. People will come to me," or "I just need a little slice of the market." How hard can that be? That's a fool's game. And I've worked at companies where people would express, "Oh, all I need is 5% of the market." Never achieved it. So the much better approach is to, okay, let's make my own market. Here's my better solution, and then go talk to customers, that potential customers.
Oh, that's a great answer. I'd really say that's truly inspiring to know. How do you identify a problem that is worth solving?
Yeah. Well, you certainly might have something from your own experience um, that you think is a problem worth solving. Just think about something that troubles you, some inconvenience that you're dealing with, and think about how you might be able to solve that. Or once again, try to understand what another community has for a need. Um, I gave the example of my grandmother, um, but just I've lived in this home for decades now, and I realized that well, one of the rooms is always difficult to keep warm, and so just started to work on adding some heat to that room. It's not a technical revolution, but why didn't I recognize this 10 or 20 years ago and address the problem at the time?
That could have become a great idea. That could have become great business at that time,
Uh-huh.
because now we have centralized heating systems for the houses.
Mhm.
So yeah, I understand that. Is failure necessary for innovation and growth?
It- it's not necessary, but it really helps. Um, you learn from failure. Um, take a look at the smartphone. Obviously a tremendous success. Um, and the smartphone revolution really began with the introduction of the first iPhone, but it was not the first smartphone. Um, I mean, there were also PDAs, personal digital assistants, that have been around prior to the smartphone. That they had much of the capabilities of a smartphone, but didn't have the communications capability. Um, but there was a Nokia device, the communicator, which came out uh, probably 10 years before the first iPhone did. And the first device was relatively primitive, but by the time the first iPhone came out, they'd had generations of this product that enhanced it quite a bit, and it really had you know largely the same capabilities that the first iPhone did. Um, Palm was a company that made PDAs. They had a product called the Trio, which also operated a lot like a smartphone. Um, and the Nokia communicator, was never more than a niche product. The Palm Trio, it had people that loved it, but it never took over the market. Um, but I think people learn from the shortcomings of those devices. There was even an Apple related product. So Apple had a Newton, the device called the Newton, which is a PDA, which did not do very well. And I think Apple learned from that failure. And a bunch of engineers actually left Apple around then and tried to create something called a smartphone. The company was called General Magic. There's actually a very good documentary about it, and if you watch that documentary, and just you can Google it. I'm sure it's available to stream somewhere. Um, you kind of go through what they were working on, and it was remarkably like everything that you expect to see in an iPhone. And I suspect there was a feedback loop. They ultimately failed. The company went out of business. So I think all those failures came together to guide the introduction of the smartphone, the iPhone, and then once it was successful, it was kind of obvious that this was the path forward. And then Android appeared not long thereafter. Um, And another interesting wrinkle with the mobile phone business around that time, I was working for a company that supplied components to the mobile phone manufacturers, including Nokia, the dominant player at the time. And among the products that we provided was the Wi-Fi interface. And notably, in the United States, the phones are all sold through the carriers, the people that own the networks. And they all required Wi-Fi to be turned off because they were in the business of selling their network. They didn't want people to bypass the network. So everybody in the US had a phone with Wi-Fi in it, almost everyone, but the Wi-Fi was disabled. So you couldn't make use of it. When the first iPhone came out, Apple recognized that the cellular network was not adequate, could not handle what they wanted to do with the device. So they and everybody was kind of keen on seeing what Apple would come up with. So they took advantage of that and said to the providers, the network providers, well, Wi-Fi has to be turned on. And one company got exclusive rights to the iPhone for a few years as a result of that. And so that that required a little bit of vision to understand the shortcomings, and it really served that network company very well because it brought lots of new customers because they wanted to have this cool new device.
That's something interesting to know. And about the documentary, I will definitely go and watch it after this.
Okay. All right.
How do you validate a startup idea before launching it?
Well, if obviously, talking to potential customers is key. Prototyping is key. So think about the simplest possible prototype you can make, to test the concept. The classic analogy is, if your great idea is to invent a car, think about the steps that you can take to do that. And so the first step would not be to create a wheel or half a car or just the motor. The first step might be to make, like roller skates to see if people want to go around on wheels, or a skateboard, and then maybe a bicycle, and then a motorcycle, and then a car. So rather than spending a fortune developing a car to see if people would like it, start with something simple that gives you at least part of the answer of whether people would like to move around on a street on wheels.
Oh, I understand. What skills are most important for future entrepreneurs?
Well, good technical skills are kind of a key underlying requirement. You don't need to be the best engineer in the world, although it helps to have an outstanding engineer on your team, at least one. The ability to kind of think back, to think about what somebody might actually need, to the ability to listen, kind of social skills are needed. Just to be able to think about the underlying need even more than what the individual is telling you. So that's a great skill. There are other soft skills. You could be an individual entrepreneur, but more likely it's a team. And so then it comes down to, how do you lead the team? And it'll be a collaborative thing, but you kind of need to cajole people to all point in the same direction, and that's a difficult skill to teach, but it's one that you can learn. And I had decades of training to do this, so maybe I gotten good at it. I think one of the great opportunities that you have in the IEEE, with all the different organizations we have, If you have a student branch, the student branch chair, that's a leadership opportunity. You run an event, that's a leadership opportunity. Um, and the great thing about those leadership opportunities is that you don't have any financial leverage, right? When I'm managing a team, I control how much money they make, right? And so that's kind of direct influence over them. When I'm doing something in the IEEE, I'm a volunteer, I'm not getting paid, and nobody else is getting paid. Um, and so that skill of kind of influencing and convincing the team to all head in the same direction, to work through difficulties, that's a great skill that transfers directly to a corporate environment or an entrepreneurial environment to help get everyone heading in the same direction.
So our next question is how important is teamwork in building a successful startup? Teamwork.
Yeah, it's critical. As I was just saying, um, you probably will start with a smallish team, so different people will have different roles. It's interesting when you look at people and their skills. I had a revelation probably 20 years ago now. You know, I was managing in a large organization, and you have to rank your engineers. And to me, that was always a difficult thing. And I was managing a team. I was pretty proud of my team, and then I would talk to the next my peers, and they were proud of their team. And we all thought we had above average teams, which obviously is not true. Um, and we all thought we had above average people on our teams, and obviously that can't be true either. The revelation is that each person has a specific skill. There's some that have a tremendous set of skills, strong people skills, strong technical skills, a great combination. That's relatively rare. Um, and there are some people that are laggards and don't have any specific skills, but most people tend to have at least one strong skill. And if you're effective at leading a team, you make sure that the people are working in the area that they're most skilled at. So if you don't have great people skills, you're not going to be the person that's leading the interviews of potential customers. Um, and if you don't have great financial skills, then we're not going to put you in charge of managing the budget. Um, so you really need to assess the abilities of each individual and make sure that that's the function that they're trying to fulfill. I've worked with going back to the example of IEEE work. Um, there are people that are really good at planning. So you want to get them on your team early, and so they can start thinking about how to plan things. But sometimes those people are not very good in the moment. So you don't want to have them running operations during the event. But there are some people that are really strong operationally. Just know how to get things done in the spur of the moment. Those people may not have good planning skills. And so, I worked on an event, and I worked with one of my colleagues there who was just fantastic during the event. Every little problem he addressed, he kept the thing running. And so when I did my next event, I put him on the planning team, and it just wasn't his forte. And so that was a revelation. You need to understand everyone's strengths and weaknesses, and make sure that the team has those assignments aligned with individual skills.
Okay. So our next question is, what role does technology play in driving modern innovation?
technology has become so pervasive. I have a hard time imagining innovation that doesn't count on technology right now. In my lifetime, technology, electronics in particular, it went from kind of a, a nice supplement to our lives to right now, central to our lives. Um, just think about a toaster. A toaster used to be a mechanical device with some hot wires that heated up. Now your toaster probably has more compute power than a mainframe computer in the 1950s, because it's so straightforward. So it can do all kinds of smart things. So yeah, technology is really everywhere. I mean, same thing with automobiles. When I was young, an automobile was a completely mechanical device. Might have a radio, and now it's an electronic device that might have a motor in it, right? So there's been a complete transformation. So yeah, I don't know how you innovate today without technology, and technology is so powerful that it often makes solving problems much simpler.
So, in today's era, if we can say that technology plays a vital role in driving modern innovation.
Yes, I would say so.
So, next question is, how can young innovators attract investors or funding? Because most of the time, startups require funding to catch a pace. So,
Yeah.
how can they attract them?
Yeah. Well, so there are ecosystems for funding ideas. I don't really know what the environment is like in India, but certainly in the U.S. There are different kinds of funding opportunities. Um, there are so-called angel funders. So these are typically relatively wealthy individuals who are willing to make investments. If you ever watched like Shark Tank, I don't know if there's an equivalent to that, but those are basically angel funders who are willing to take a chance on something, and of course they'll want a piece of whatever the benefits, an ownership stake in the business. And then after that, there are venture funders, which it's more organized. These are organizations that gather funds from investors and then manage how it gets allocated. And there are different levels of venture funders. There are venture funders that offer billions of dollars of funding, and others that dabble at a lower level. So it's kind of surprising how many different venture funders there are. We've done events. So my big conference is the International Microwave Symposium. We did an event last year, and it's a specialized little event that we had, but we had I think half a dozen different venture funders show up, and none of them was big. None of them I'd ever heard of before. So there are lots of them out there. I don't know how to network into them, but we do have the IEEE Entrepreneurship Program. Just Google IEEE Entrepreneurship, and they run a bunch of activities and entrepreneurship training. That might be a great place to start. They don't put you in touch with venture funding, but they have a lot of experience there, and there are venture funders that collaborate on the entrepreneurship program. So they would probably offer greater insights into how to find venture people than I would. So I would definitely look for the entrepreneurship program, the IEEE Entrepreneurship Program. And if your university school has an entrepreneurship class or program, certainly take advantage of that. We're seeing more and more universities in the U.S. having innovation and entrepreneurship programs here. So that makes for a great opportunity as well.
Okay. So, what is the difference between a good idea and a successful business idea?
There are great ideas that never went anywhere. And the successful business ideas are, well, I mean, there's always a bit of luck involved, but the truly successful ones are the ones that fulfill a need, um, and then have the ability to reach that market. Um, and so that takes a bunch of things. Obviously, first understanding a compelling need, so someone that really wants your product. Then you need to be able to prototype it and demonstrate it and learn from that. And you'll probably have some failures and make adjustments. And then of course you need the sufficient supply chain, the ability to make and deliver this thing and get the word out. So it takes typically a nice growth plan, and even then, sometimes great ideas fail. So there's no guarantee in these things.
How do entrepreneurs deal with risk and uncertainty?
Well, entrepreneurs in general tend to be pretty optimistic. We've got this great thing we're working on, and this is what's going to happen, it doesn't always work out. And there are lots of serial entrepreneurs. A few of them have had a string of successes. Most of them, have a success or two and then a bunch of failures, which they can learn from. So yeah, the failures just need to be understood as opportunities, right? You learn from that failure, and you can think about both. What did I do wrong? Why didn't I actually understand what a customer wanted? Or or that failure taught you, oh well, they didn't need this, but what I found out is that what they needed was that, and so then you can take off from there and develop something else.
Well, that means you can be either optimistic after a failure or you can be pessimistic. It depends on
Yes.
your
Yes.
personality.
Yes. And if you're going to be a serial entrepreneur, chances are you will be by nature an optimistic person, because if you're pessimistic, you'll assume that it'll fail before you start.
That's true. That's so true. What role do incubators, mentorship, and communities play in startup success?
So incubators can have a lot of the resources you need to get started. I mean, they might have connections with investors too, but they might have lab space. They might have some skilled people to help you kind of evolve your idea. There are different kinds of incubators as well. In the U.S., there's the National Science Foundation, and I wouldn't call it an incubator, but they run a program that serves as an incubator called ICOR, and they probably have a couple hundred ideas that flow through the ICOR problem, probably maybe more than that. And they run workshops, and they kind of force you to go out and find customers and talk to them and revise your idea. So yeah, if you're your first time trying something, if you can be connected to an incubator, it really does provide you a lot of support in terms of both infrastructure and kind of uh, intellectual support to help you work through the process.
Okay. So, my question is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start but feels afraid or unsure?
Well, there's always going to be some uncertainty, um, and use that to your advantage. Um, so if you're unsure, think about why you are unsure. What is it that troubles you most about what you're doing, and then dive into that. Try to understand what's underlying that, and then let's see if we can fix that. You know, if you have a great idea and you're not sure that the technical approach that you're taking will solve the problem, or you think it's too expensive, well, kind of work through it again. um, Sometimes, um, I mean, from a technology point of view, um, there are straightforward ways to do something with technology, but then sometimes people think about, oh, well, maybe I could do it this way instead. For example, there was always a device called a modem that was used for almost everything, for connecting your computer to the rest of the world, um, for connecting a phone. So basically taking the digital world and transmitting it. And at some point, someone realized, hey, we could do this functionality in software. And as my processor got more and more powerful, this would be a simple thing to do in the processor. And now I saved myself some money in terms of not having to acquire this modem, because I got a processor that can handle this on the side.
Well, most of the time it is about either capital that that they are not able to find the investors, or the team that is ready to take risks. So that may be one of the reasons why young people are afraid to start a startup, even if they
Mhm.
have a good idea.
Mm.
So, do you have any advice about this?
Yeah. Um, well, you could always try to find a rich uncle. um, something else that you could consider. I mean, depending on what your idea is, IEEE's mission is to advance technology for the benefit of society. Education, but other things as well. Um, and so, how do we advance technology? And if your idea is kind of in support of that mission, um, so you know, IEEE has funding to support its mission. So that doesn't mean you can get money to develop a product that you can sell. But if you have a great idea that might advance a technology, or might apply a technology to a need. So, for example, there's a smart village program which goes to less developed parts of the world and helps bring in electrification and modernization. Um, so that's using technology for the benefit of humanity. No one's making money off of that, but the people that are engaged in that, they've been applying technology in a useful way, and that they get funding from different parts of IEEE to do that. So let's not forget that as a potential source of funding. If you're really looking to make a product and sell it, well, that's not something that IEEE can help you with. But if you're thinking about a service, or even a product that is really just intended to help a population, that is something that you might be able to get some IEEE funding to explore.
That might truly motivate our young entrepreneurs
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
take IEEE membership, as well as to not afraid of what they want to do and start their
Yeah.
own business venture.
Yeah. Well, it's not a great way to start your business, but it might be a great way to learn to innovate. And so you could do some innovations that serve the IEEE mission, and from that experience, learn enough so that you might be able to do an innovation that you could turn into more of an entrepreneurial experience.
That's true. So actually, we have a segment called the rapid fire questions, in which
Uh-huh.
you have to give answers in one word or one sentence,
Okay.
depending on your answer. So
Okay.
the first question is innovation or execution? What matters more?
I'll go with execution, but execution without being thoughtful is bound to fail.
That's true. Next question is one word that defines a successful entrepreneur.
Resilience.
Resilience. Biggest startup mistake in one line.
I'm sorry.
Biggest startup mistake in one line.
Thinking you're too smart.
That's true.
Thinking you're smarter
Risk
than
of
everybody else.
that's we can say overconfidence in this. Maybe
Overconfidence. Yeah.
risk or stability if you want to start a business.
If you want to start up, if you want to innovate, it's risk.
It's risk.
If you want
Idea
stability,
or team.
you go work for a big company. And even
That's true.
that's not stable anymore.
That's not stable. That's true. Idea or team. What comes first?
Idea or
Team. Team.
idea. Assemble your team around the idea.
Yeah. That's a good. That's a really great way of thinking. Actually, there are a lot of times when people look for people, but they don't know what to do. And when the
Mhm.
idea comes, they dissipate. So
Right.
I truly believe your answer.
Yeah, and back to my example of why there aren't any average engineers out there. It's a matter of understanding what each person's skills are, and if you don't know what you're trying to do, you don't know what skills you need.
That's true. Uh, First thing you do when an idea comes to your mind.
Write it down, and maybe that's just something that happens at my age, but I'll be off doing something, and that's a good thought, and then 10 minutes later it was, what was that thing I was thinking about? Um, so I've learned, if I think I've got something good, I have to put it down. I'll pull out my phone and make a note on it if I don't have a piece of paper nearby.
Well, that's true because when we write it down, we can think more about it rather than
Oh,
just forgetting about it.
absolutely. And the most important thing is, okay, so you have this kind of kernel, um, and once you put it down, then your mind will kind of work on it in the background.
That's true.
I'm sure we've all experienced this. I hope you've all experienced this, but you're kind of stuck with a problem, and then you go to sleep for the night, or you go for a long walk, or you go for a bike ride, and your mind is focused on something else, and then all of a sudden, the answer pops into your head. Lots of problems get solved in the background while you're not thinking about them.
That's true. And sometimes it happens that you forget about it. What was the solution? And then you look at this problem and then you remember another solution about it. Now you have two
Absolutely.
solutions rather than
Yep.
one, rather than zero.
Right. Yep.
Actually. So that's true. Write it down is the best answer.
Yep.
Funding or passion? What drives a startup more?
Passion.
Passion. One habit every entrepreneur should have.
Open-mindedness.
That's so true. Well, if you can't think out of the box, then you can't run a business.
If you're fixated on that one thing that you're convinced is the right thing, then your mind won't be open to the alternatives. So you won't necessarily go down the right path.
That's true. Failure is a lesson or setback. What do you think?
Lesson. no doubt.
That's
Well, you know, it can be a lesson. If it's not a lesson, then you've allowed it to be a setback.
okay. And one skill students must learn today.
There's so many. Um, Collaboration.
Collaboration. Okay. With this, we have completed all our questions for the day. Thank you so much,
Great.
sir. That was a
It's
great session with you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for giving us your precious time
Okay.
and joining us. It
And
was truly inspiring to talk to you.
yep. And I look forward to all kinds of great technical solutions coming out of you and all the members of your student branch.
Definitely, sir. We'll work for it. Thank you so much for joining, sir. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Great talking to you. Bye.
Thank you so much, sir. Bye bye.